1. Anaheim, California, 1980. For several months, a single mother named Dorothy Scott had been receiving threatening calls from an obsessive stalker. She had confided in friends and family, stating that the voice sounded familiar, but that she could never quite place it. Having a stalker can be a terrifying ordeal, especially one that constantly calls you up, telling you that they're going to cut you into pieces so that your body will never be found. The caller would routinely describe what Dorothy was wearing or doing at any given moment, just to prove that he was keeping a close and constant eye on her. Dorothy coped as best as she could, and even took up karate lessons as a means of self-protection. She also considered buying a hand if continued as normal. Until the identity of her stalker was uncovered, there was little else she could do to stop the constant abuse. She continued to go to work. It was at work on May 28th that one of her co-workers, Conrad Bostrom, fell sick, with a large red mark appearing on his arm. Conrad had been bitten by a spider, and his arm had become infected. Supposing that certain things like this can go unnoticed, he was treated by the doctors well into the night, with Dorothy and Pam waiting for him the entire time. Finally, after hours of examination and treatment, Conrad was discharged, and the three readied themselves to leave. It was then that Dorothy told her two associates to wait for her inside, while she went to get the car. After an unusually long wait, Conrad and Pam were relieved to see Dorothy's car fast approaching the entrance. The high beams flicked on, temporarily blinding them both, and the car sped past them and out onto the main road. Dorothy would never be seen again. Her car was found abandoned 10 miles away in a Santa Ana alleyway. It was on fire. No trace of Dorothy could be found inside. Now, this case is disturbing in its own right, but what makes it particularly chilling is the abductor's twisted and sadistic dedication to causing grief. Almost every Wednesday for the next 4 years, Dorothy's mother would receive a daytime call when she was home alone. Each time, it was the same low, gruff male voice saying things like, "Is Dorothy there? I've got her. I killed her." Whoever the caller was, he wasn't stupid. He never stayed on the line long enough to be traced. Even though many of the calls were recorded, he'd been using an obviously disguised voice. As such, nobody could identify him. In mid-1984, just over 4 years after Dorothy had disappeared, a construction worker happened upon a set of dog bones in some brush off Santa Ana Canyon Road. Just underneath these dog bones, covered only by light soil, were a human pelvis, an arm, 2 thigh bones, and a skull. These bones were later identified to be Dorothy Scott's. A watch found along with the body had stopped at 12:30 a.m., May 29, 1980. On the day that the newspapers announced that Dorothy's body had been found, the Scott family received 2 final calls. It was the same familiar voice. "Is Dorothy there?" Whoever killed Dorothy was sick enough to have tormented her parents for the best part of 4 years, never allowing them to find closure or come to terms with their loss. Such sadistic dedication suggests that the killer was totally psychopathic. With such a disregard for human life, it's completely possible that she wasn't this man's only victim. Both of Dorothy's parents have since passed away, never knowing the identity of the man that murdered their daughter in 1980. As time ticks by, it seems more and more unlikely that anyone else ever will either. Other than him, of course. Number 2. Encephalitis Lethargica, also known as sleepy sickness, was a mysterious plague that suddenly appeared in 1916 and affected millions of people. It attacked the nervous system of the victims, killing a third of those who became infected. Another third recovered, but were mostly left with severe neurological damage. What makes this disease particularly disturbing, however, is what it did to the remaining third. They were left in a state somewhere between life and death, plunged into a slumber that lasted for months, years, in some cases, decades. In 1928, it had completely vanished, and nobody knows why. Here's some old footage from 1925 that shows a woman suffering from the sleeping plague. Some of you might be familiar with the disease, as it was the subject of the movie Awakenings with Robin Williams and Robert De Niro, which in turn was based on a book by the same name. It was written by a British neurologist called Oliver Sacks, who helped survivors of the sleepy sickness outbreak, but who remained alive only as living statues. One such patient remained in a statue-like state for over 70 years. Dr. Sacks discovered that administering L-Dopa to those affected by the sickness brought them back to a state of conscious lucidity, if only for a short while. The fact that we still have no idea why the sickness appeared and disappeared so suddenly is somewhat unsettling, but accounts from the lucky ones who recovered revealed the creepy thoughts that swirled in the heads of the dreamers. One patient, known only as Miss R, said that she imagined how it must feel to be lost in an inescapable nightmare, locked in a body frozen in sleep. As Dr. Sachs observed while treating his patients, many were forgotten about and left to live out the rest of their statute existence in hospitals, nursing homes, and asylums, hundreds of thousands of them passing away one by one. During their lucid moments on L-Dopa, he stated that many accepted their hopeless situation with a mournful dignity. Others were resentful, angry about the years that were stolen from them. As Sachs wrote, they yearned incessantly for a twofold miracle, not only for a cure for their sickness, but an indemnification for the loss of their lives. They wanted to be given back the time they had lost. We can only hope that something similar never returns to plague our species. Number 3, 1948, Somerton Beach, Adelaide, Australia. The setting to what has been described as the world's most perplexing cold case. It was the first day of summer in southern Australia, and jeweler John Bain Lyons was taking an evening stroll with his wife. They noticed an immaculately dressed man lying asleep on the beach, his head propped up against the seawall. His legs were stretched out, and his feet crossed. At first, they assumed he was just some sort of drunk that had passed out on the beach. Watching him from a distance, the man seemed to lift his right arm upwards, and then back down to his side. They thought nothing more of it, and continued on their way. Half an hour later, another couple noticed the man in the same position. He was motionless now, with his left arm splayed out in a weird fashion. Stranger, they thought, was his attire. Not many people would choose to wear a full suit with pristinely polished shoes to the beach. His face was covered in mosquitoes. Again, they assumed he had passed out after drinking one too many beers. The next morning, the first passerby, John Bain Lyons, returned to the beach for an early swim. He noticed the man was still there, propped up against the sea wall, and he hadn't moved an inch. Lyons went over to check on him. The man was cold to the touch and had been dead for some hours. Looking at these pictures, there's something unsettling about his pose, perhaps because it looked so casual. Investigators searched the body for some form of ID but came up with nothing. There was no wallet or cash, and the name tags of all of his clothes had been carefully snipped away. One of his trouser pockets had been repaired with an unusual type of orange thread. The immediate investigation revealed a few facts. The body had not been in the water. Death appeared to have taken place whilst he was sleeping. There were no marks on his body, no signs of any violence or a struggle. What there were signs of, however, was poisoning. The post-mortem revealed blood in irregular areas of the body, such as the stomach. His liver was distended, his pupils unusually small, and his spleen was about 3 times larger than it should be. Strangely, the toxicology report showed there was no poison in his system, despite all signs pointing towards it. In fact, no cause of death could be decided upon. Some hypothesized that a rare type of poison may have been used, one where all traces of it died away quickly. Another irregularity was the man's calf muscles. They were extremely pronounced, more so than the coroner had ever seen. They were like that of a professional athlete's. The shape of his feet suggested that he had been in the habit of wearing high-heeled and pointed shoes. One expert suggested he may have been a ballet dancer. So who was the Somerton Beach man? To this day, nobody knows. Sets of his fingerprints were analyzed the world over, and people from all across the area came to try and identify the body. Some thought they recognized his face from the newspaper, though nothing ever came of this, and nobody knew who he was. What was discovered, though, was the dead man's suitcase, which had been left at the train station. Inside it was a table knife, a stencil kit, a reel of the same unusual orange thread, and some clothes. 3 items of clothing bore the name T. Keene, though it was later revealed that this wasn't the man's true identity, and that somebody had purposefully left these tags inside to fool the police. All other traces of the man's real identity had been removed. The police were stumped at this point, and it wouldn't be until 4 months later that a surprise discovery would be made. This discovery, however, only added to the confusion. Sewn into the waistband of the man's trousers was a small hidden pocket. Inside was a crumpled-up piece of paper, which contained only 2 words. Tamam, shud, a Persian phrase meaning, "it is ended." The phrase had been torn from a rare poetry book, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The plot thickened. 8 months after the man's death, the copy of the book had been found. 2 men who had been in the area at the time the man died had found the book lying in the back seat of their car. Silently, they just assumed it belonged to the other, and it had remained in the glove box ever since. They forgot all about it. When they heard about the case, they re-examined it and found that the phrase had been torn out from the last page of their copy. They came to the police immediately. Examining the book under ultraviolet light, a secret code was found on one of the pages. Nobody has ever been able to break it. And that's as far as anyone's ever come to cracking the case. Namely, not very far at all. We still don't know who this man was, who left the book in the men's car, or even what the code means. Nor do we know for certain how he died. The alleged use of poison, along with the fact that all identification had been removed from the body, have led many to speculate that the gentleman was some form of spy or a government agent. As such, he could have been assassinated. Others suggest this was an elaborate suicide. The man's body was embalmed to preserve one of the few pieces of evidence the police had at the time. It was then buried and sealed beneath concrete, ready to be exhumed if ever needed. For the next 30 years, at odd intervals, flowers would appear at the unknown man's grave. Nobody knows who kept leaving them there. Number 4. In 1948, a gigantic tornado swept through the town of Woodward, Oklahoma, causing massive destruction and claiming the lives of 185 residents. 4-year-old Joan Gay Craft lost her mother that day, and her stepfather was critically injured. She managed to survive the ordeal with minor injuries, as did her half-sister Jerry. They were taken to a nearby hospital, and it was in the hospital's basement that both Joan and Jerry were sheltered, along with a number of other refugees who had lost everything during the carnage of that day. At some point during the night, 2 men dressed in army uniforms entered the basement and asked for Joan by name, claiming that they needed to rush her to another hospital where her stepfather was being treated. Joan protested, desperate not to leave her sister's side, but the men assured her everything was going to be okay and grabbed a hold of her. They stated that they'd be back for Jerry shortly and that the two wouldn't be separated for long. Of course, members of staff confronted the men when they heard Joan's cries, but they managed to convince them that they were both officials. This did seem reasonable. Many of the victims were being whisked away to other treatment centers to help solve the capacity issues. Without further resistance, Joan was escorted out by the 2 men. They never returned for Jerry, and Joan was never seen again. As if it hadn't lost enough that day, the town also lost Joan. What's odd is that even these days, Woodward is an extremely small community, far from any other towns or cities. In '48, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. It seemed strange that these 2 men knew to ask for Joan by name, and yet nobody else recognized either of them. They knew who they were coming for. Despite the case receiving nationwide attention, Joan was never found. Number 5. You're probably not intimately familiar with the work of the singer Q Lazarus, or her band, The Resurrection. She's best known as the one-hit wonder musician behind Goodbye Horses, a song made famous in the horror movie Silence of the Lambs. It's actually a really awesome, if slightly eerie track, befitting of the scene that made it famous. If you don't know it, then pause the video here and go and check it out via the link in the description. It might help you appreciate the mystery behind the singer. A few months ago, Reddit user Myrna asked if anyone had any information about Q Lazarus after 1996. Like many others, they had searched and searched but came up with nothing. It seemed unusual that after that point, there was no information about her online. The trail just goes cold. A few other users joined in on the search and came up with some interesting leads. Here's what they found out. Q Lazarus's real name was Quiana Lucky. She moved to the UK to start a heavy metal band. Her ex-manager last saw her looking unwell. She became close to a Swedish hustler and cokehead, who apparently cut her off from the rest of the world and filtered everyone away from her. Her songwriter, William Garvey, said that he was certain she was dead. Garvey himself died in 2009. Perhaps most odd is that she has unclaimed royalties just waiting to be collected. Seeing how her music has featured in some prominent movies, this could be a significant amount of money. Why wouldn't she have claimed it by now? Even her old bandmate, Gloriana Galicia, says that she doesn't know whether Q is alive or dead. Now, don't get me wrong, I'd say this mystery is more odd than sinister. She became somewhat well-known while the internet was still finding its feet. It wasn't like nowadays, where there's a plethora of information on every one-hit wonder that's ever graced the airwaves or a big movie soundtrack. Perhaps she just faded away into obscurity and is living a quiet life somewhere. Still, for someone who sang a song with such a cult following, it seems strange that she could just disappear from all public consciousness without there even being a scrap of information on her well-being or what she's up to now. As the lyrics to her hit say, "All things pass into the night." Here's a bonus entry. I thought it was interesting, but not really the same vibe as the other ones. It's an unsolved mystery 7,000 years in the making. In 1996, a group of German construction workers unearthed the prehistoric remains of a ritual site in Herxheim. The site was absolutely surrounded by mass graves, with at least 500 human bodies being discovered. The bones belonged to men, women, and children, from newborns to the elderly. Some of the site was destroyed by construction, but it's estimated that at least 1,500 bodies were buried there. Examination of the bones revealed the people had been butchered and eaten. In addition, bones from at least 200 dogs were unearthed as well. This begs the question, what happened in Herxheim 7,000 years ago? The condition of the human bones indicates that they were healthy at the point of death. Prior to being buried, the bones had been stripped of all flesh. There also seems to be no visible signs that the people died violent deaths, either via stabbing or bludgeoning. The reason that it's thought the people were eaten is because ancient livestock butchering techniques seem to have been used to remove the human meat, and the bones had been cracked apart and crushed to drain them of marrow. Gnaw marks are prominent on some of the bones, and the skulls of many had been carefully split, likely to remove the brains inside. Trinkets, talismans, and other knickknacks were buried along with the bodies, some from cultures as far as 500 kilometers away from the site. They had all been smashed or destroyed before being tossed into the burial pits. Since there seemed to be about 1,500 bodies buried there, it's impossible for it to have been a simple local graveyard. That number far exceeds the amount of people who would live in a single settlement at that point in history. This discovery gives us an incredible insight into our ancient ancestors. What it tells us precisely is, of course, a mystery. This could have been some sort of religious human sacrifice, or perhaps something more akin to an elephant graveyard, where the sick and dying from hundreds of miles away would travel to rest forever. That might explain why people from so far away could be found there, buried with their cultural artifacts. Maybe cannibalism was part of their ancient burial process. Why would their possessions have been destroyed, though? Was this part of the ritual, or was there a more sinister reasoning behind it? Maybe they believed that one's own personal possessions were theirs and theirs alone, and that by smashing them they could deter grave robbers. Ultimately, we'll never know for certain. Regardless, it's a truly interesting thing to think about. Speculating about what happened all those years ago really conjures up some disturbing images in the mind. Any theories of your own? He's done some amazing pieces. I learned about a lot of these cases from a subreddit called Unsolved Mysteries. I've linked it down in the description, and I really urge all of you to go and check it out if you're interested in hearing about more cases like this, or reading about ones that I've talked about here. How about you guys? Is there anything else you would have included? Let me know down in the comments, and if I do make a follow-up video, I'll consider your suggestions. As always, be sure to smash that like button, or I'll smash you. And I'll be back with another video very, very soon. Until then, Lazy Legion, you all stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.